If you had seen us at the charity gala that winter, you would have thought I was one of the lucky ones. My husband Daniel had one of those faces people trusted immediately. Calm smile. Tailored navy suit. A silver Rolex his mother had gifted him after he made partner at the firm. He knew how to shake hands. How to laugh at the right volume. How to put a hand at the small of my back in public just long enough for everyone to think he adored me. And me? I was the woman beside him in a black dress and simple diamond studs, smiling at strangers who complimented our marriage like it was a piece of architecture. Strong. Elegant. Built to last. Emily, you two are such a beautiful couple, one woman said, lifting her champagne flute. Honestly, the way he looks at you? I smiled because women are trained to protect the illusion even when they're the only ones who know where the cracks are. Daniel leaned in and kissed my temple for show. We do okay. That was his favorite phrase whenever anyone praised us. We do okay? As if our life together had been something we built side by side. It hadn't. What people saw was the final picture. They didn't see the years before that gala. They didn't see the apartment I paid for when Daniel was still trying to pass the bar. They didn't see the nights I stayed up editing his resumes, helping him prepare for interviews, cooking cheap pasta in a kitchen with a broken drawer because we were trying to save every dollar. They didn't see me wearing old Adidas sneakers with a split sole while Daniel rehearsed arguments in the mirror, promising me that one day we'd laugh about how hard it used to be. And maybe the cruelest part was that for a long time, I believed him. Back then, Daniel used to say things like, "When I make it, everything I have will be yours too." Later, I would understand that men like Daniel never lie in ways that sound like lies. They lie in promises, in tone, in implication. By the time we got to the gala, we lived in a beautiful house in Westchester with white stone steps and imported kitchen fixtures his mother liked to brag about to her friends. The kind of house people photographed during Christmas. The kind with a Tesla in the driveway and a walk-in closet full of carefully curated wealth. But despite all of that, I had learned one very specific truth. Nothing in that house had my name on it. Not the deed. Not the Tesla. Not the vacation condo in Naples. Not even the brokerage account where Daniel stored what he called our future. At first, I thought it was temporary. Legal strategy. Tax planning. Something boring and sophisticated that rich people did while using phrases like asset shielding and liability separation. Every time I asked, Daniel gave me the same smooth answer. It's just cleaner this way. Cleaner. That word should have warned me, because in Daniel's world, anything clean was something scrubbed of fingerprints. The first time I noticed something was seriously wrong wasn't dramatic. No lipstick on a collar. No late-night confession. No screaming match. It was a package. A Louis Vuitton box delivered to the house 3 days before my birthday. I happened to open the door when the driver arrived. He asked for Mrs. Catherine Mercer, Daniel's mother. I signed for it because the driver seemed in a hurry and brought it inside. Catherine came over later that afternoon wearing cream slacks, a silk blouse, and Gucci loafers that somehow announced her presence before her mouth did. She looked at the orange box on the entry table and smiled. "Oh, good," she said. It arrived. I waited. Then I laughed lightly. "Daniel's already starting birthday season?" She looked at me. And in that tiny pause, I felt it. Not confusion. Not embarrassment. Satisfaction. "Oh, honey," she said, touching my arm the way people do when they're about to insult you under the disguise of affection. "This isn't for you." I smiled back. But something in my chest hardened. Later that night, I asked Daniel about it while he loosened his tie in our bedroom. "For your mother?" I said. "Louis Vuitton for no reason?" He shrugged. "She helps us a lot." Another word I would eventually hate. "She helps you." "You mean?" Daniel turned slowly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means your mother gets luxury gifts, and I get told to be patient every time I ask why my name isn't on anything." He exhaled like I was exhausting. "Emily, not everything is about your name being on things. That sentence sat between us. Not everything is about your name being on things. And there it was. The philosophy of our marriage? Finally said out loud. Not ownership. Not security. Not partnership. Visibility. Optics. Gratitude. He wanted me present but not protected. Useful but not empowered. That night I lay awake listening to him sleep and stared at the ceiling fan turning in the dark. I started replaying little moments that I had dismissed before. The way Daniel's mother once corrected a realtor when the woman casually referred to the Westchester house as Daniel and Emily's home. Catherine had smiled and said, "Technically, it's under a family holding structure." A family holding structure. At the time, I let it pass, because rich people say bizarre things with confidence, and everyone else pretends it makes sense. Then there was the Naples condo. Daniel called it our getaway place. But every bill went to his mother's address. When I asked why, he said she handled the bookkeeping. The Tesla registration? Catherine Mercer. The club membership? Catherine Mercer. Even the insurance documents stacked in Daniel's office drawer seemed designed to circle around me without ever landing on me. I told myself there had to be a reason. There always is. Women tell themselves. Right before the floor gives out under them. 2 weeks after the gala, Daniel hosted dinner for 3 clients from his firm. I spent the whole afternoon preparing the house because Daniel liked things perfect when other people were coming. Candles lit. Glassware polished. Cheeseboard arranged. Napkins folded. The kind of performance wives are expected to deliver without ever being credited as labor. Catherine arrived early, carrying a Hermes scarf bag and the expression of someone inspecting property. She walked through my kitchen as though she were touring a hotel suite she partly owned. "You should have worn the green dress tonight," she said. "The black one is a little severe on you." I kept slicing figs. "Good evening to you too, Catherine." She smiled thinly. "I'm just helping." That was her favorite word. Helping. Daniel got it from her. Their family had a genius for using soft language to disguise domination. During dinner, one of Daniel's clients complimented the house. "It's gorgeous," he said. "You two picked well." Before I could answer, Catherine gave a delicate laugh. "Well?" she said, lifting her wineglass. "Daniel has always had excellent judgment. Not we. Not they. Daniel." I saw one of the wives glance at me. She noticed it too. Daniel said nothing. That was when I began to understand that silence is often the loudest confession in a marriage. After dinner, while I loaded plates into the dishwasher, I heard Daniel and Catherine speaking quietly in his study. The door wasn't fully closed. "She's getting curious," Catherine said. Daniel's voice stayed low. "She'll calm down." "You said that 6 months ago?" "I'm handling it." My hands froze over a dinner plate. Catherine again. "You need to be careful. If she starts asking for statements or records," Daniel cut her off. "She won't." I set the plate down too hard. The sound echoed. Their voices stopped. A moment later, Daniel stepped into the kitchen with the expression he always wore when he was about to tell me a version of reality he expected me to accept. "You okay?" he asked. I turned and looked at him. Really looked. At the expensive watch. The practiced calm. The face I had once trusted more than my own instincts. And for the first time in our marriage, I heard the question underneath everything. "What exactly are you hiding from me?" He gave me that patient smile people use on the unreasonable. "You're overthinking again." That sentence used to work on me. Not because it was true, but because it was efficient. It pushed me into the position of defending my own perception instead of questioning his behavior. But something had changed. Maybe it was the overheard conversation. Maybe it was the LV package. Maybe it was years of being treated like a decorative partner in a life I helped finance from the beginning. Whatever it was, I didn't back down this time. "I want to see everything," I said. "The house documents. The accounts. The car title. The condo records. All of it." Daniel stared at me for a second too long. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "Emily, you don't understand how these structures work." "Then explain them." He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Why are you trying to make this ugly? That question was so perfect. So manipulative. I almost admired it. Not why are you worried? Not what do you need from me? Why are you making this ugly? As if the ugliness began when I noticed it. I folded the dish towel slowly and set it on the counter. No, I said. You made it ugly. I just finally saw it. For a moment his expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. A flash of irritation. Not guilt. Not fear. Annoyance. Because men like Daniel don't panic when you're hurt. They panic when you stop being manageable. That night, he slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Catherine. You're misunderstanding financial planning. Don't destroy your marriage over paperwork. I read it 3 times. Then I looked around the bedroom I had chosen. Decorated. Cleaned. And lived in for years. The wallpaper. The reading chair. The framed wedding photo. The house felt different now. Not colder. More precise. Like I could suddenly see the labels hidden under everything. Belongs to Daniel's mother. Belongs to Daniel's mother. Belongs to Daniel's mother. By noon, I had done something Daniel never thought I would do. I called a lawyer. Her name was Naomi Bennett. And she had the kind of voice that made men regret underestimating women over 40. I found her through an old college friend who sent only one text. If your husband is hiding money, call Naomi before he knows you're looking. Naomi didn't waste time with comfort. At our first meeting, she listened quietly while I explained the marriage. The properties. The mother-in-law. The way every major asset somehow belonged to Catherine on paper. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. How long have you been married? 12 years. Did you contribute financially while he built his career? Yes. Did your standard of living increase during the marriage because of assets supposedly owned by his mother? Yes. She nodded once. And does he tell people those assets are effectively his? All the time. That was the first moment someone made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Naomi opened a legal pad. Then this may not be as clever as he thinks. I stared at her. What do you mean? She capped her pen and looked directly at me. I mean, men hide assets in a parent's name when they think divorce court only sees labels. But courts also look at control, benefit, source of funds, and tax behavior. A pause. Sometimes, she said, the lie isn't in where the money sits. It's in how long people think they can move it around without leaving a trail. I felt my pulse in my throat. A trail? Naomi gave a small smile. Yes. Emily. A trail. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. Bring me every tax return you can find. And just like that, the marriage Daniel built, on polished surfaces and careful wording, stopped looking like a fortress. It started looking like paperwork. And paperwork, unlike husbands, can betray the truth. The first tax return I found was in a leather file box Daniel kept on the top shelf of his office closet. Not hidden exactly. That was the arrogance of men like him. They don't always lock things away, because they assume you'll never dare to go looking. The box held 5 years of returns. Neatly tabbed. Plus K1 schedules. Property tax statements. And correspondence with an accountant named Leonard Vale. Daniel loved orderly deception. He wanted every lie alphabetized. I sat on the floor in his office with the file box open beside me and Naomi on speakerphone. Don't take originals if he'll notice, she said. Photograph everything. Dates first. Entity names second. Any trusts. LLCs. Or interfamily loans. Flag them. I turned pages slowly. My hands steady in a way my heart wasn't. The Westchester house wasn't owned by Catherine Mercer directly. It sat inside an LLC called Cedarstone Holdings. The Naples condo was under another entity. The Tesla lease reimbursement came through a consulting account tied to Catherine. Luxury purchases were booked as client hospitality or property staging. There were line items so absurd they almost made me laugh. Gucci at Saks? Louis Vuitton luggage? Executive travel preparation. Rolex servicing? Client-facing, professional image maintenance. Is this normal? I asked. Naomi's laugh was short. Normal? No. Common? More than you'd think. Then I found the transfers. Month after month? Daniel's bonuses moved into accounts connected to Catherine's entities. Then back out as management distributions, family reimbursements, or temporary capital support. Enough to create confusion. Enough to bury ownership beneath paperwork. Not enough to erase it. What matters, Naomi said, is who earned it, who controlled it, who benefited from it, and whether he represented these assets as marital lifestyle while disclaiming them as personal ownership. Daniel did that constantly. Good, she said. I sat there in my husband's office, surrounded by proof that my marriage had been engineered like a shell game. And for the first time in months, I felt something stronger than humiliation. I felt direction. That same evening, Catherine invited me to lunch. Not because she cared. Because Daniel had told her I'd become inconvenient. She chose a place she loved in Greenwich where the women wore tennis bracelets at noon and pretended their salads were meals. Catherine arrived in oversized sunglasses, an ivory blazer, and that same composed smile she used when she wanted to remind the world she believed herself untouchable. She placed her Hermes bag on the seat beside her like it deserved its own chair. Emily, she said warmly, as if we were close. I'm glad you came. I sat down. I'm sure you are. Her smile held. Daniel says you're upset. Daniel says a lot of things. She removed her sunglasses and folded them carefully. Let me be honest with you. Men under pressure make financial decisions for protection. It isn't personal. I almost admired her precision. She wanted to reduce betrayal to administration. So the house, the condo, the accounts, the car, none of that is personal? Catherine tilted her head. You enjoy all of it, don't you? There it was. The oldest trap in the book. You benefited. Therefore you cannot question how it was built. I leaned back. You mean the lifestyle I helped build when your son had nothing? She didn't flinch. Daniel was always going to succeed. No, I said quietly. Daniel was always going to be polished. Success still needed funding. Her mouth tightened. Good. For once. I wanted her uncomfortable. She reached for her water. I think you're letting resentment cloud your judgment. And I think you and your son have spent years confusing paperwork with morality. Her smile vanished then. Not fully, but enough to show the steel under it. You need to think very carefully before you escalate this. I held her gaze. That sounded like a threat. That was advice. No, I said. Advice usually comes with concern. You came with stage makeup and legal talking points. For the first time, Catherine looked at me like I wasn't furniture. That afternoon, I went to the bank where Daniel and I kept our original joint account, the only truly joint account we had left. It still existed mostly for appearances and household spending. Grocery runs, utilities, dinner taps, optics. I requested historical statements. The teller recognized my name and smiled politely. Of course. Mrs. Mercer. For a second, I nearly laughed. That name. His name. The one I'd carried while being quietly erased from everything else. By the time I got to the parking lot, Naomi had already emailed me a list of additional documents to collect. Mortgage applications, insurance forms, vehicle registration records, property tax bills, emails referencing ownership or control, proof of my contributions during early marriage, public social media evidence of Daniel presenting assets as his own. That last one almost felt comic. Daniel adored appearing successful online. Not in an influencer way. In a corporate, respectable, blessed and grateful way. LinkedIn posts about discipline. Christmas photos in front of the Westchester house. Captions about what we've built. A Naples balcony photo with the caption, "A little time away at our place before Q4 starts." Our place. Not his mother's place. Interesting how language changes when men want applause. I spent the next week building files. Screenshots. Statements. Tax schedules, email threads, receipts from the years when my salary covered rent, insurance, food, and Daniel's exam fees. I found old transfers from my account into his back, when we still said things like, "One day this will all be worth it." Those were the hardest to look at, not because of the money, because of the faith. At night, Daniel tried a new strategy. Charm. He started coming home with flowers. He asked if we should reset. He booked dinner reservations and texted me links to beach resorts like we were a tired couple in need of romance rather than a woman and the man who had spent 12 years laundering security out of her life. One night he came into the kitchen while I was slicing lemons and stood near enough for me to smell his cologne. "I hate this distance between us," he said. I kept slicing. "You should hate the reason for it." He exhaled. "Emily, you're blowing paperwork into betrayal." I turned to him. "No. You turned betrayal into paperwork." He hated when I did that, when I said the truth in one clean sentence. Daniel preferred long conversations where reality could be softened. His face tightened. "What do you want?" That question again. Men ask it when they think women are still negotiable. "I want honesty." "I've been honest." I stared at him. He corrected himself. Slower this time. "I've tried to protect what we have." "We?" I said. "Show me one legal document where that word exists." He said nothing. The silence answered for him. A few days later, Naomi filed for divorce. Daniel found out at work when he was served. He called me 14 times in 20 minutes. I didn't answer. When he came home, he wasn't polished anymore. He was furious. He threw the envelope on the kitchen island. "You filed without talking to me?" I looked up from my tea. "I talked." "You lied. You're making a catastrophic mistake." "For who?" His nostrils flared. "You have no idea how ugly this gets." I set my mug down. "You keep using that word like I'm the one who introduced ugliness into this marriage." He ran a hand through his hair. "My mother was right. You've become irrational." There it was. Catherine's voice through Daniel's mouth. "Good," I said softly. "Because rational women stay trapped in arrangements like this for years." He stared at me like I'd become someone unfamiliar. Maybe I had. Then he said the sentence that finally burned away any remaining doubt. "You're not entitled to assets that were never yours." Not entitled. I looked at the man I had carried through his unfinished years. The man whose first office furniture had been bought with my credit card. The man whose mother now wore Gucci loafers financed by a structure built on my silence, and I felt something inside me settle into absolute cold clarity. "You're right," I said. He blinked. "I'm not entitled to lies dressed up as marriage either." That night he slept elsewhere. Not the guest room. Elsewhere. At first, I thought hotel. I was wrong. 3 days later, Naomi called me just before noon. "Do you know a woman named Sabrina Cole?" The name meant nothing to me. "No." "You do now," Naomi said. Private investigator found repeated transfers tied to one of Catherine's entities paying rent on a Manhattan apartment. My grip tightened on the phone. Daniel's apartment? We don't know yet. But of course we knew. That evening I drove into the city myself. The building was the kind that wanted to look discreet while charging for secrecy. Soft lighting. Uniform doorman. Quiet marble lobby. I sat across the street for almost an hour before Daniel stepped out. Not alone. The woman beside him was younger than me by at least 10 years. Camel coat. White sneakers. A sleek ponytail. She laughed at something he said and touched his arm like she'd done it 100 times before. Daniel opened the passenger door of a black SUV for her. Gentleman. Performer. Fraud. I didn't cry. That surprised me most. I had expected devastation. Instead, I felt confirmation. Of course, a man who hid his life in his mother's name would hide another woman in another zip code. I took photos. Sent them to Naomi. Then drove home with both hands steady on the wheel. The affair changed something strategically. Naomi called it pattern evidence. It spoke to concealment, misrepresentation, dissipation of marital funds, lifestyle inconsistencies. I called it greed, because greed is never satisfied with one form of theft. The next week, Daniel's attorney filed the predictable response. Most significant assets were owned by Catherine Mercer or independent family entities, and therefore outside marital division. Naomi read the filing in her office, then slid it across the desk toward me. They're leaning hard on legal title. Can they win with that? She smiled. And there was nothing kind in it. Not if the tax records say what I think they say. She tapped 3 pages with her finger. Daniel had made one critical mistake. Maybe several. But one was fatal. He had represented income one way for tax advantage and another way for divorce strategy. To the IRS adjacent universe, he exercised material control. To family court. Suddenly, he was just a grateful son occasionally benefiting from his mother's generosity. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Courts don't like magic tricks when money is involved. I looked down at the highlighted entries: intercompany transfers, occupancy claims, depreciation schedules, reimbursement records, paper trails, numbers. Don't blush. They don't charm. They don't call you emotional. They sit there and wait for someone patient enough to read them properly. For the first time since filing, I let myself imagine it. A courtroom. Daniel in a tailored suit. Catherine composed in pearls. Their attorney speaking confidently about structures and titles and formal ownership. And then Naomi standing up with tax records in her hand. Not rumor. Not suspicion. Records. Real ones. The kind that don't care how charming a man looks beside his wife at a gala. I asked the question quietly. When does the court see all this? Naomi closed the folder. Soon, she said. And when they do, your husband's biggest problem won't be what he hid. She met my eyes. It'll be how many times he signed his name next to the truth. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Sabrina Cole was not on her own. The reason my marriage ended. Women like her usually aren't. They're symptoms. Accessories to a system already rotten. Proof that a man who feels entitled to hidden money will eventually feel entitled to hidden lives. Still, the apartment mattered. Not because I needed emotional closure. I was past that. It mattered because Daniel had likely been funding it with money he claimed was never truly his. That contradiction was where men like him collapse. Naomi sent the investigator back the next morning. By Friday, we had enough to draw a map. The Manhattan apartment was leased through another Catherine-linked entity. Rent paid on time. Premium furnishings. Parking garage fees. Grocery deliveries. And multiple high-end purchases billed through a corporate card that Daniel's filings described as partially business-related. Business-related. Apparently that business included silk sheets, imported candles, and a woman who wore Gucci sunglasses on weekdays. Naomi laid everything out on her conference table in neat stacks. The affair is ugly, she said. But I care more about the money route. I know. She gave me a look of measured approval. Good. Judges don't reward heartbreak. They respond to evidence. There was an art to the way Naomi thought. She never wasted outrage where facts would do better. She had me create a timeline. My financial contributions during Daniel's early career, years of marital income growth, acquisition dates of major assets, transfers to Catherine's entities, public statements by Daniel claiming practical ownership, concurrent funding of the apartment and luxury spending, divorce filing, post-filing movement of funds. That last category exploded faster than I expected. Once Daniel knew divorce was real, he got sloppy. Accounts shifted more aggressively. Charges appeared. Items vanished. Naomi subpoenaed updated records and one Friday afternoon called me with the kind of tone lawyers get when the other side has done something both stupid and useful. He moved money after service, she said. How much? Enough. My pulse jumped. Enough for what? Enough for a judge to notice. I sat down at my kitchen table, still technically in a house that legally belonged to someone else, though every corner of it held my labor. What did he do? He transferred funds between Catherine-linked entities, made an unusually large consulting reimbursement, and paid down a vehicle note. The Tesla? No, she said. A Porsche Cayenne. I closed my eyes. Of course, there was a Porsche I hadn't known about. Of course. That weekend. Catherine appeared at the house without notice. She stood in my doorway in a cream trench coat, pearls at her throat, as if arriving for tea instead of a territorial confrontation. Her face was calm. But calm on Catherine always meant armed. "I think we need to stop this spiral," she said. I didn't invite her in. But she stepped inside anyway. The nerve of certain women only grows with wealth. She walked into the foyer, looked around once, then turned back to me. "Daniel is under enormous pressure." I folded my arms. "Daniel seems to prefer pressure when he's creating it for other people." She ignored that. "This divorce is becoming unnecessarily public." Interesting word. Unnecessarily. She lowered her voice. "You can still handle this privately." Privately for who? For all of us. There it was again. That family plural with me outside of it? I looked at her carefully. Perfect makeup. Perfect posture. Perfect handbag resting against her wrist like armor. "How many assets have you held for him?" I asked. Her eyes cooled. "I'm not answering that." That wasn't a denial. She gave a tight smile. "I'm trying to save you from embarrassment." I actually laughed. "You think I'm the one who should be embarrassed?" Catherine took a step closer. "You have no idea how ugly litigation can get. Affairs get mentioned. Financial misunderstandings get distorted. People say things they can't take back." I stared at her. Then the meaning landed. She knew I knew about Sabrina. Not because Daniel confessed. Because Daniel panicked. Something hot and sharp moved through me. But I kept my face still. "Financial misunderstandings?" I repeated. "Is that what you're calling the apartment?" For the first time in my life, I saw Catherine lose control of her expression. Only for a second. But 1 second was enough. "You've been snooping," she said. "No," I replied. "I've been catching up." That was the moment she stopped pretending this was maternal advice. "You're being foolish," she said quietly. "Men make arrangements. Sensible wives protect the larger picture." "Sensible wives?" I repeated. "Yes." Her chin lifted. "Women who understand what matters." I moved closer until we were standing almost shoulder to shoulder in my own foyer. "No," I said. "Women who understand what matters don't hand their lives over to cowards with accountants." Her face flushed. She left without another word. But that visit told Naomi exactly what she needed to know. They were worried. Worried people show up. Worried people threaten privately because they don't want public documents. And public documents were exactly where we were headed. Discovery began in earnest. Daniel's side resisted everything. Delayed. Objected. Claimed privacy. Claimed third-party ownership. Claimed harassment of Catherine. Naomi dismantled each objection with surgical calm. If Catherine owned the assets independently, then documentation would prove it cleanly. If she didn't, refusal itself became informative. Every hearing added pressure. Every request narrowed their options. Then came the email that shifted the case from ugly to dangerous. Not dangerous for me. For them, it arrived through production from the accountant, Leonard Vale, who likely thought he was sending routine correspondence buried in thousands of pages. The email thread was 2 years old. Subject line: occupancy and exposure concerns. Daniel had written, "Need to make sure house remains fully under mom's structure on paper. Emily is starting to ask questions. Also confirm, no cross-reference appears in personal exposure review." Leonard replied, "As discussed, beneficial use is one thing, title another. Biggest concern remains consistency, if ever scrutinized in matrimonial context. Tax treatment and practical control can conflict." Conflict. That word sat there like a loaded weapon. Naomi printed the email and slid it across her desk toward me in silence. I read it once. Then again. Then again. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from seeing yourself discussed in administrative language by the people closest to you. Not as a wife. Not as a person. Acerbarily. Emily is starting to ask questions. I looked up. He planned this. Naomi's expression didn't soften. Yes. Not because she lacked empathy, Because she respected me enough not to dilute the truth. Good, I said after a long pause. Good? Yes. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. Because I'd rather be betrayed on purpose than dismissed by accident, I said. At least now I know exactly what kind of man I married. Naomi nodded once. Then let's make sure the court knows too. As we prepared for temporary orders, Daniel tried one final emotional angle. He called from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. When I heard his voice, my entire body went still. Emily? Not Babe. Not Em. Not his usual soft, domesticated names. Just Emily. Cold weather voice. What do you want? He exhaled. This has gone too far. You should have thought of that before the apartment. Silence. Then, I made mistakes. Plural. Nice of you to notice. I'm trying to be honest now. I laughed. And he hated that. Men like Daniel can survive anger better than ridicule. You don't get honesty points after subpoenas. His tone sharpened. Do you want to burn everything down? No. No. I said. Just the lie. He went quiet for a moment. Then he tried something almost tender. We had real years. Emily. I stared out the window at the bare winter branches in the yard. Yes. We had. That was the tragedy. But real years do not excuse deliberate theft. Then you should have behaved like those years mattered, I said. And hung up. The temporary hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning. Daniel arrived in charcoal wool, composed but thinner around the mouth. Sabrina was nowhere in sight. Obviously. Catherine sat behind him in ivory and navy, her face arranged into aristocratic disapproval. I wore a cream blouse, dark suit, low heels, and the calm Naomi had coached into me like breathing. Do not perform pain. Do not chase morality. Answer clearly. Let their contradictions speak louder than your anger. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp glasses and the kind of stillness that made everyone else's nerves feel noisy. Daniel's attorney opened with what we expected. Many disputed assets were owned by Catherine Mercer or independent entities and should not be treated as marital property. My claims, they suggested, were emotionally inflated by marital breakdown and suspicions unrelated to title. Naomi stood. I will never forget her voice that morning. Not loud. Not theatrical. Precise. She walked the court through practical control. Beneficial use. Source of funds. Interenity transfers. Marital lifestyle dependency. And inconsistent documentary treatment. She introduced the social media posts, the reimbursement records, the occupancy references, the email with the accountant. Then she said, Your Honor, we are not asking the court to be impressed by labels. We are asking the court to look through them. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten. Catherine remained still, but one hand gripped her handbag too hard. Then Naomi introduced the tax issue. Not every detail. Not yet. Just enough. She referenced documentation indicating that Daniel had, in certain context, represented control and use of assets in ways materially inconsistent with the position currently being advanced to this court. The judge looked over her glasses. Inconsistent how? Naomi answered. That will be clearer with full tracing, Your Honor. But clear enough already to warrant preservation orders and deeper review. Preservation orders. That was the first crack they could not smile through. The judge granted them. No significant asset transfers, without disclosure. Expanded financial production. Additional tracing. Daniel didn't look at me when court recessed. Catherine did. Her face was pale beneath perfect makeup. And that was the day I realized something important. People like Daniel and Catherine rely on intimidation until documentation arrives. After that, they rely on delay. But courts are built on documents and time. And we now had both. As Naomi and I walked out of the courthouse, she adjusted her coat and said, almost casually, They're more vulnerable than they thought. I looked back once at the building, at the steps, at the cold sunlight on the stone. Because of the tax records? She glanced at me. Because of the tax records, she said. And because your husband is arrogant enough to think all systems can be manipulated the same way. She paused. Family can be manipulated. Optics can be manipulated. Spouses can be manipulated. A beat. But signed financial records? She said. Those are harder to gaslight. And for the first time since this all began, I smiled without effort, because Daniel had spent years putting everything in his mother's name. He just forgot one thing. Numbers still remember who paid for the life. Part 4. The records they thought were too boring to matter. Most people think revenge stories turn on dramatic moments. A slap at a dinner table. A secret video played in a courtroom. A witness walking through the door at the perfect time. Those moments happen. And they feel good. But real destruction often starts in places no one glamorizes. A spreadsheet. A tax schedule. A reimbursement ledger. An accountant who billed by the hour and assumed no one would ever compare year against year. That was where Daniel's world actually started to crack. Naomi hired a forensic accountant named Priya Shah, a woman with a calm face and a mind that seemed to enjoy untangling lies for sport. The first time we met, she wore a navy sweater. No jewelry except a wedding band. And the expression of someone mildly insulted by messy bookkeeping. She spread the records across a conference table and said, "Your husband is careful in the way mediocre liars are careful." I blinked. That sounds specific. It is crash. She pointed to a flowchart she'd built. Truly sophisticated concealment avoids repetition. Daniel repeats structures. Same channels. Same categories. Same informal habits. He trusted complexity more than discipline. Naomi smiled. I told you she was good. Priya traced the path of Daniel's income through a series of Catherine-controlled entities. Bonus payments landed in one account. Then were redistributed as loans. Reimbursements. And management fees. Luxury assets were floated under family business logic. But their use pattern told another story. The Westchester house? Occupied exclusively by Daniel and me. The Naples condo? Booked around Daniel's schedule and his social media posts. The Manhattan apartment? Funded through the same web of transfers. Vehicle expenses? Supported by accounts Daniel used personally. High-end purchases? Mostly attached to his life. Not Catherine's. Here, Priya said, sliding me one annotated sheet. Is the point where they got greedy. It was a tax year 3 years earlier. Daniel had wanted improved financing terms and submitted a personal financial profile that effectively treated several Catherine entity assets as functionally available to him. Not always direct ownership, but beneficial access. Influence. Stability. Control. Enough to look rich when rich mattered. Then, when divorce appeared, those same assets transformed into untouchable maternal property. Can a judge see that clearly? I asked. Priya's mouth curved. Judges understand hypocrisy exceptionally well. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. One payment trail showed that Catherine's entity had covered renovations to the Westchester house. But the money originally came from Daniel's compensation. Another showed that Daniel paid private school donations through one structure while publicly presenting the generosity as his mother's philanthropy. He borrowed credit from the same lie that erased me. By the middle of that month, we had enough to do something Daniel did not expect. Naomi moved to compel additional production and attached targeted exhibits that previewed the inconsistency without revealing the full depth of tracing. In plain English, she let them know we knew. That was when Daniel panicked for real. Not emotionally, financially. We saw it in the activity. An attempted document revision. Sudden accountant correspondence. Internal scrambling. New attorney on Catherine's side. Emergency consultations labeled estate clarification. People only clarify estates when they're terrified prior explanations won't survive scrutiny. Daniel called again. This time I answered because Naomi wanted me to. Not to reconcile. To listen. He sounded tired. Different. The polish was cracking. What do you want from me? He asked. I almost smiled at the irony. Men love that line when what they really mean is, Why are consequences so inconvenient? I want the truth on paper. You're going to ruin my career. No, I said. Your signatures are doing that. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand what you're triggering. I looked down at the records spread across my dining table. I understand exactly what I'm triggering. He lowered his voice. My firm is asking questions. There it was. Finally. Not his conscience. His firm. Not our marriage. His image. That mattered to Daniel more than anything. I'm sorry your reputation is having a difficult week. I said. Emily. No. I cut in relation. You don't get to say my name like we're still in the same story. I hung up and immediately documented the call for Naomi. 2 days later, Catherine made her move. She filed an affidavit, 30 pages of polished fiction. According to her, she had independently acquired and maintained all major disputed assets out of maternal generosity. Prudent planning, and occasional assistance to a beloved son whose wife had become bitter and unstable during the divorce. Unstable? There it was. Right on paper. Women are emotional when men want leverage. Women are unstable when they develop pattern recognition. Naomi handed me the affidavit in her office and said, Read paragraph 12. I did. Catherine claimed she alone chose to provide Daniel and me housing in the Westchester property from time to time, and that occupancy arrangements were flexible. Revocable. And entirely her own. From time to time, I said. We lived there for 7 years. Exactly. Paragraph 19 was worse. She claimed many of the luxury expenditures tied to her entities reflected her own lifestyle and travel, including designer retail and premium transportation. Naomi waited. Then, she slid over another file. Security gate logs from Westchester. Parking records. Concierge delivery data from the Manhattan apartment. Naples condo check-ins. Vehicle service dates. And absurdly satisfying, airport lounge receipts. The record showed Catherine physically could not have been using the assets the way she claimed. On several occasions, she was in Palm Beach while her card paid for Daniel's Manhattan expenditures. It would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. She lied. I said. Yes. Naomi replied. And lying in anger is one thing. Lying in a sworn affidavit is better. Better? For us. That was the week I stopped feeling like prey. I began to understand the rhythm of this kind of war. First they dismiss you. Then they patronize you. Then they threaten you. Then, when none of that works, they commit themselves to a lie big enough to save face. And once they do that, every new document becomes a blade. My own deposition was scheduled first. Daniel's attorneys expected emotion. Naomi prepared clarity. We spent 2 full days rehearsing. No speeches. No moral essays. No wandering. Just facts. What did I contribute? What did Daniel say? How were the assets used? How was lifestyle presented publicly? What access did Catherine actually exercise? When did suspicion begin? When did I learn about Sabrina? What did Daniel tell me regarding ownership? By the time I sat in that conference room under fluorescent lights with a court reporter typing every word, I was ready. Daniel's attorney smiled like someone doing me the courtesy of professional patience. Mrs. Mercer, he began. Isn't it true that you enjoyed a very comfortable lifestyle during your marriage? I looked at him. Yes. And that many aspects of that lifestyle were made possible by Catherine Mercer's financial support? No. His smile flickered. No? They were made possible by Daniel routing marital earnings and control through Catherine's name. The room stilled slightly. He rephrased. You're not a tax expert. Correct? No. I said. But I am an expert in living inside a lie. Naomi didn't interrupt. She let it sit because it wasn't theatrics. It was accurate. They asked whether I had ever personally reviewed all legal title documents during the marriage. No. I said. So, your assumptions about ownership were based on what Daniel told me publicly and privately, I replied, including calling the properties ours, his, and part of our future depending on audience. That was the problem for them. Daniel had not lied consistently. He lied socially one way, financially another, and matrimonially in a third language altogether. By the time my deposition ended, even the reporter looked a little less bored. Daniel's deposition came a week later. Naomi let me sit in the adjoining room and watch by video feed. He looked immaculate. Gray suit, blue tie, controlled expression. The same corporate face he wore at galas and firm dinners and charity boards. But under Naomi's questions, I watched the first true signs of strain. Mr. Rected. Mercer, she said. Did you ever refer to the Westchester residence as your home? Yes. Did you refer to it that way publicly? Yes. Privately? Yes. On social media? Yes. Did you occupy it as your primary residence for years? Yes. Did you exercise discretion over maintenance, improvements, and staffing? Yes. Did marital income fund expenses connected to that property? It depends what you mean by fund. Naomi didn't blink. I mean money earned during the marriage by you or routed from your compensation. A beat. Yes. She moved to the Naples condo. Same pattern. Then the Manhattan apartment. His attorney objected to scope. Naomi overruled the drama with documentation. Did you stay at the Manhattan apartment regularly? Silence. Mr. Mercer? Yes. Who paid for it? I'm not sure. Naomi held up records. Would reviewing these refresh your recollection? The video quality wasn't perfect. But I still saw it the flicker in Daniel's eyes when the paper he thought existed only inside systems suddenly appeared in the room. That appears to be connected to my mother's entity. Funded how? I'd need to see underlying. You will, Naomi said. My question is simpler. Did you personally benefit from housing paid through an entity linked to your mother? Yes. Did your wife know about this apartment? No. The room went quiet. It wasn't the affair itself that mattered most. It was concealment through structure. That theme was now everywhere. By the time Priya finalized her preliminary tracing report, even Naomi, who almost never showed emotion, looked satisfied. This, she said, tapping the report, is what wins cases like yours. Not tears. Not outrage. Not cinematic speeches. And math, unlike husbands, rarely changes its story halfway through. The court set a major evidentiary hearing for 6 weeks later. Long enough for more subpoenas. Long enough for more pressure. Long enough, apparently, for Daniel's professional life to start whispering back at him. Someone from his firm's ethics committee requested records connected to certain reimbursements. Naomi couldn't see everything there. But she didn't need to. The timing alone told us enough. Then, one rainy evening, Daniel showed up at my temporary apartment. No warning. No flowers this time. No charm. Just a soaked coat. Tired eyes. And the look of a man beginning to understand that expensive shoes do not stop legal freefall. I didn't let him in. He stood in the hallway and said, "Can we talk?" "We are talking." He looked exhausted. "They're turning this into something bigger than it is." I crossed my arms. "Who is they?" He gave a bitter laugh. "You, Naomi. The court. My firm. My mother's lawyers. Take your pick." My voice stayed calm. That's what happens when lies require departments. He flinched. Then he said the thing I think he believed would soften me. "I never meant for you to end up with nothing." I stared at him. Men like Daniel always think the wound is material. They never understand the insult was existential first. "You already decided I should," I said. "You just hoped I'd never notice." He looked down. Rain dripping from his coat cuff onto the carpet outside my door. For a second, he almost resembled the younger man I once believed in. Almost. Then he said, "My mother told me this was the safest way." And there it was. The oldest defense in weak men. I was advised. I gave him one last long look. "Then maybe she can advise you on what to say when the tax records reach court." I closed the door before he answered. And on the other side of that door, for the first time in 12 years, Daniel Mercer stood alone with the life he had so carefully hidden. A life that was finally being read line by line. The hearing was set for Thursday morning, and by Wednesday night nobody was sleeping. Not me. Not Daniel. Probably not Catherine. Definitely not their lawyers. Naomi was calm. But it was the kind of calm surgeons have before opening someone up. Priya had finalized a cleaner version of the tracing report with demonstratives simple enough for a judge to follow but detailed enough to destroy anyone pretending the transfers were innocent. I met them both in Naomi's office the afternoon before court. On the table were binders labeled marital income tracing, beneficial use analysis, inconsistent ownership positions, reimbursement irregularities, post-filing transfers, affidavit contradictions. Naomi looked at me over her reading glasses. Tomorrow matters. But not because one hearing solves everything. It matters because once the judge sees the structure clearly, the rest of the case changes. I nodded. Priya turned her laptop toward me. On screen was a visual chart of Daniel's compensation, moving through Catherine-linked entities, and then reappearing as support for assets Daniel claimed were not his. Blue arrows. Red arrows. Dates. Amounts. Repetitions. It looked like a nervous system built for deceit. Simple, Priya said. That's what wins. Not because the fraud is simple. Because the explanation must be. She pointed. Money earned here. Routed here. Used here. Claimed differently here. Then she leaned back. He wanted the benefits of ownership without the legal consequences of ownership. That is not sophisticated. It is just greedy. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with that low electric tension that only money cases create. Nobody cries dramatically in hallways. Nobody faints. The violence is subtler. Reputation. Status. Future leverage. Tax exposure. Professional survival. Daniel arrived with 2 attorneys instead of 1. That alone told me everything. Catherine wore pale gray and pearls. The uniform of women who believe elegance can function as credibility. I wore navy, not because it was symbolic. Because Naomi said judges trust women in navy. The hearing began with technical framing. But everyone in the room knew what the real issue was. Whether Daniel had built a fake legal distance between himself and the assets that had financed our marriage. His side argued title. Our side argued reality. Daniel's attorney stood first and moved through the expected script. Separate ownership. Maternal generosity. Estate planning. Misinterpretation by an embittered spouse. He was polished. But his tone held strain now. They were no longer dismissing us. They were containing damage. Then Naomi stood. If Daniel had spent years mastering performance, Naomi had mastered the opposite authority without theatrics. Your Honor, she began. This case is not about whether a mother may own property. She may. It is not about whether inter-family support exists. It does. It is about whether titles were used here as shields against equitable scrutiny, while the underlying reality remained one of practical ownership, control, and marital benefit. She walked the judge through the Westchester house first. Primary residence. Daniel directed renovations. Marital earnings routed to maintenance. Public claims of ownership. Private occupancy. Household staffing approvals through Daniel. Lifestyle branding built around the property. Then the Naples condo. Then the Manhattan apartment. At that, Daniel's side objected again. Naomi's voice remained even. Concealment pattern is relevant when the same structures are used both for personal benefit and denial of benefit. Objection, overruled. I watched Daniel sit perfectly still while his knuckles turned white. Then Priya testified. She was devastating precisely because she sounded bored by dishonesty. She explained tracing in plain language. Explained beneficial use. Explained why a court should care less about who held title and more about who earned, controlled, and enjoyed the assets. Daniel's attorney tried to complicate everything with entity formalities. Priya shut it down gently. Complexity in documents does not eliminate economic reality, she said. That line landed. Then came the tax records. Not every page. Just the right ones. A financial disclosure submitted for favorable lending posture. Tax treatment implying control. Compensation-linked funding. Reimbursements inconsistent with pure maternal ownership. Depreciation and occupancy positions not aligning with current litigation claims. The judge leaned forward. "Help me understand," she said. Naomi did. When it benefited Mr. Knott Mercer to appear financially substantial, these assets were functionally proximate. When it benefited him in divorce to appear distant from them, they became his mother's alone. The judge's eyes moved to Daniel. That was the first moment I saw fear on his face. Not annoyance. Not anger. Fear. Then Naomi introduced Catherine's affidavit, page by page, line by line. She compared the claims with external records. Catherine said she primarily used certain luxury expenditures herself. Priya overlaid date records showing Catherine in Palm Beach, while the charges aligned with Daniel's Manhattan schedule. Catherine said occupancy of the Westchester home was occasional, school records, staffing logs, and recurring vendor access showed stable residence. Catherine said she independently sustained the structures. The tracing showed recurring replenishment from Daniel's compensation streams. Not a misunderstanding. A system. Daniel's attorney rose for cross and did what weak cases always do. He suggested Priya was making interpretive leaps. Suggested marital resentment colored the narrative. Suggested that wealthy families often operate informally. Priya folded her hands. "I'm not testifying about feelings," she said. "I'm testifying that the money path does not match the legal story being told." The hearing broke for lunch. In the hallway, Daniel finally looked at me. Really looked at me. Not like a wife. Not like an inconvenience. Like a threat he should have taken seriously much earlier. Catherine did not look at me at all. That told me even more. After lunch came the moment that changed the room. Naomi introduced the email between Daniel and Leonard Vale. "Need to make sure house remains fully under mom's structure on paper. Emily is starting to ask questions." On paper, you could feel the air shift. Daniel's attorney objected to context, to interpretation, to weight. The judge allowed it provisionally and read it herself. Then she asked Daniel directly, "Mr. Mercer, why would you write this if the ownership structure reflected true independent reality?" Silence. His attorney began. "Your Honor, if I may." The judge held up a hand. "No," I asked him. Daniel cleared his throat. It was an imprecise email. Imprecise. That was the defense. Naomi let the silence sit just long enough to hurt him before saying, "Imprecise in which direction?" "Mr. Mercer?" "Toward the truth. Or away from it." His face changed. Only slightly. But enough. He didn't answer cleanly because he couldn't. Anything honest would destroy his position. Anything evasive would insult the judge's intelligence. That is where liars truly suffer, not when they are accused. But when every available answer costs them something, then Naomi delivered the line I knew she had been saving. "Your Honor, the court need not decide today every dollar's final classification. But it should decide whether the current story is credible. The tax records, lending disclosures, occupancy data, reimbursement patterns, and sworn contradictions all point in one direction. Title was used here, not to reflect truth, but to manage exposure." Exposure. There was that word again. The judge took notes. A lot of notes. And once a judge starts writing more than the lawyers are speaking, somebody's life is changing. By the time court recessed, no ruling had yet been issued from the bench. We would get a written order. That was normal. Still, everyone understood what had happened. Daniel's mother owns everything story had not collapsed completely, but it had stopped sounding elegant. Now it sounded tactical. And tactical wealth is dangerous in family court because it invites curiosity. As we stepped outside, cold wind hit my face hard enough to make me breathe deeper. Naomi buttoned her coat. "That went well." I looked at her. "You mean it went badly for them?" "That too." Priya joined us a moment later. Expression neutral as ever. "He's going to move money again if he gets the chance." Naomi nodded. "Then let him try." Because now the court was watching. That evening, Daniel did exactly what panicked men do. He made two mistakes. First, he sent me a text. We could still settle this without destroying each other. Each other. As if mutual damage had ever been the design. As if I had hidden a second apartment. As if I had spent years placing everything in my father's name while smiling beside him at fundraisers. Second, he contacted one of the vendors connected to the Westchester property and tried to revise how certain services had been historically described. Naomi found out by morning. Vendors talk. Especially when subpoenas have already introduced the possibility that ordinary invoices might become evidence. By Friday, we filed notice of potential spoliation concerns and further support for broader financial restraints. Daniel was no longer managing a divorce. He was creating a credibility crisis. And once credibility leaves a courtroom, it rarely returns dressed the same way. That weekend, I opened social media for the first time in weeks. Daniel's firm page had removed his recent feature photo. Small detail, big meaning. His professional world had started distancing itself from the shine. Foreman like Daniel. That is worse than public embarrassment. It is a slow social death. Not immediate cancellation. Something much more painful. Doubt. I slept better that night than I had in months. Not because I'd won yet. Because the truth had finally entered the room in a language Daniel respected. Documentation. He had ignored my words. Dismissed my instincts. Mocked my questions. Minimized my pain. But he could not charm a ledger. And somewhere between the tax returns, the occupancy records, the apartment payments, and his own careless email, the life he built had begun turning against him. One signed line at a time. Part 6. The offer he made when he realized he might lose everything. The settlement offer arrived Monday morning. Not from Daniel directly, from his attorney. Marked confidential. Urgent. And clearly written by people who had finally understood something dangerous. A woman they had dismissed as emotional now had records. The offer was generous by ordinary standards. Insulting by mine. A sizable payout. Temporary exclusive access to one property. Structured support. Confidentiality terms broad enough to silence not just me, but the shape of the whole story. No admission of misconduct. No concession on beneficial ownership. No reference to hidden assets or dissipation. Translation. Take the money. Leave the lies standing. Protect his future. Naomi read the last page and handed it to me. Your reaction? I set it down. He's trying to buy narrative control. She smiled faintly. Good. You're learning to read these correctly. Do we reject it? We counter only if it benefits strategy. She paused. But yes. We reject it. I leaned back in the chair. He still thinks I'm negotiating for comfort. Naomi nodded. Because men like Daniel always mistake a woman's restraint for low ambition. That line stayed with me. Restrained women are often mistaken for powerless women. Daniel had built his entire marriage around that confusion. He mistook patience for dependence, grace for weakness, silence for consent. And now he was paying legal fees to learn the difference. 2 days later, the court issued its interim order. Not a final victory, but enough to split the sky open. The judge found substantial basis to question the formal ownership story advanced by Daniel and Catherine. Expanded tracing would continue. Asset transfers remained restricted. Additional records were compelled. Catherine's affidavit, while not fully adjudicated, was specifically noted as materially inconsistent with other evidence before the court. Materially inconsistent. For some people, that sounds technical. For women who've been gaslit for years, it sounds like choir music. Naomi called me the moment the order came through. We're not at the finish line, she said. But they have a serious problem now. I stood by the window of my apartment, overlooking wet sidewalks and passing traffic, and closed my eyes. Not because I wanted to cry, because I wanted to enjoy the feeling of certainty. Daniel had always lived above consequence by controlling perception. In rooms full of donors, attorneys, partners, and polished people, perception often does more work than truth. But a court order changes the temperature of perception. It gives doubt official shoes. By Thursday, the pressure widened. Catherine's personal attorney requested a settlement conference. Daniel's side wanted to de-escalate. Naomi translated that for me. They want to know how much pain money can prevent. The conference took place in a private mediation suite with neutral art on the walls and expensive coffee nobody touched. Daniel looked worse than he had a month earlier. Still handsome. Still polished. But the kind of polished that now resembled maintenance instead of ease. His tie was slightly off-center. His jaw remained tight. Catherine sat beside him. Silent and rigid. As if speaking less might reduce exposure, their mediator was experienced. Composed. And visibly aware, this was not a simple money dispute. These are the hardest cases. Not just divorce. Not just property. But story control. Identity control. Social outcome. Daniel's opening position was infuriatingly familiar. He wanted closure. Men always want closure right after the truth starts costing them. He said he acknowledged mistakes in communication. He said the marriage had broken down in painful ways. He said he hoped we could preserve dignity for all parties. Dignity. I almost laughed. Naomi answered for me. My client is not here to finance Mr. Body. Mercer's preferred ending. Then came numbers. They increased the offer. Considerably. Add a property. Increase support. Accelerate payment. More confidentiality. More known disparagement. More insulation for him. Naomi never looked impressed. At one point, the mediator asked if I'd like to speak. I did. I turned toward Daniel. Not his lawyer. Not the mediator. Him. You still don't understand what you did, I said. He held my gaze. I understand enough to know this is getting out of hand. No, I replied. You understand risk. That's not the same as understanding harm. Catherine shifted beside him, but said nothing. I continued. You built a marriage where I was expected to support a life I didn't legally inhabit. Then when I asked questions, you made me sound irrational. Then when that stopped working, you tried charm. Then money. Now confidentiality. Daniel's face hardened. What do you want? Emily? There it was again. That question. As if women only fight when they want to be paid differently. I answered quietly. I want the court to decide with the full record in front of it. Catherine finally spoke. That is unbelievably naive. I turned to her. No. I said. What's naive is believing money still fixes this. The mediation ended without agreement. Outside. Naomi didn't say anything for a while. Then, as we walked toward the elevator, she said, that was smart. What was? Refusing to let them redefine justice as price. That night, Daniel sent a longer text than usual. You're acting like there's no version of this where we both walk away intact. There is. I'm offering one. Stop letting your anger guide you. I read it once, then forwarded it to Naomi. Then I deleted it. Because the most dangerous thing about Daniel was not that he lied. It was that he kept trying to reframe resistance as instability. If I fought, I was angry. If I exposed, I was vindictive. If I demanded full records, I was obsessed. Women are always pathologized at the exact point men lose control of them. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Leonard Vale, the accountant, had retained separate counsel. That meant one of two things. Either he was simply protecting himself, or he was deciding whether loyalty still made sense. Naomi's follow-up subpoena request sharpened pressure on him. A week later, his attorney produced supplemental documents no one had previously volunteered. Among them was a memo. Not long. Only 2 pages. But explosive. Leonard had summarized concerns after one annual review meeting. In dry accounting language, he noted repeated tension between formal title planning, practical control, and matrimonial risk. He referenced Catherine's reluctance to hold certain liabilities while continuing to hold title benefits. He referenced Daniel's insistence that wife cannot be allowed claim path through optics. Optics. There was also one handwritten note in the margin. Likely Leonard's own. Too aggressive. Exposure if litigated. I read that note 3 times. Too aggressive. Exposure if litigated. Sometimes the downfall of arrogant people comes not because someone heroic speaks up, but because one cautious professional quietly documents discomfort. Naomi was delighted. Now, she said, we have not just contradiction, we have contemporaneous awareness of contradiction. The hearing schedule expanded. Catherine would likely have to testify. That changed everything. Because Catherine was composed in controlled environments, she excelled at charitable lunches, donor boards, and passive-aggressive family dinners. She did not excel, I suspected, under disciplined questioning tied to hard dates and signed records. Daniel knew that too. His next move proved it. He sent my brother a message, not directly threatening, just manipulative. He wrote that he was worried about my state of mind, that the legal process was consuming me, and that he hoped family could encourage me toward resolution. My brother called me immediately. Do you want me to answer him? No. You sure? Yes. I smiled despite myself. Silence is more expensive for him. And it was. Every unanswered outreach increased the chance Daniel would overreach elsewhere. By late spring, the case had developed its own gravity. School contacts were awkward with him. Firm whispers expanded. Sabrina was gone from the apartment records entirely. Either he ended it, or she ended herself out of the radius. Either way, he was now a man paying for privacy, with a life no longer private. Then Naomi called me into her office for what she described as the conversation before the conversation, which usually meant something very good or very bad. I sat down. She closed the door. The court has scheduled live testimony on the ownership and tracing issues, she said. Daniel. Catherine. Possibly Leonard if needed. My pulse kicked. When? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Not a final trial, but close enough to taste consequence. Naomi sat across from me and folded her hands. Listen carefully. They may make one last, very large offer before then. If they do, it means they believe testimony is dangerous. I knew she was right, because documents hurt, but live contradiction destroys. 3 days later, the last offer came, larger than the rest. Much larger. Enough that some people would have called me crazy not to take it. Enough that earlier versions of me tired, frightened, still trying to salvage dignity quietly might have considered it. But not this version. Not the woman who had seen the email. Not the woman who had watched the money path. Not the woman who finally understood that being offered millions to stay quiet is still an insult if the silence is the point. I told Naomi no. Just no. No speech. No explanation. No trembling moral essay. Because clarity does not need decoration. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine and sat alone on my couch. For the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine what Daniel must be feeling. Not regret. I still don't think men like him reach regret easily, but fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when your mother cannot smooth the room for you. When your lawyer cannot outtalk the documents. When your money cannot fully buy silence. When your own records are walking toward a witness stand. He had spent years putting everything in his mother's name. Now both of them were about to explain it under oath. And this time, there would be nowhere elegant left to hide. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. By the morning, Catherine Mercer took the stand. The courtroom already felt different. Not louder. Sharper. Everyone understood that this was the day polite language would either survive contact with facts or collapse in public. Catherine arrived in cream again, as though color consistency itself were a legal strategy. Pearl earrings. Smooth hair. Controlled mouth. She looked like the chairwoman of a museum board who had accidentally wandered into family litigation. But I'd seen the strain now. Not in her clothes. In the way she held still too deliberately. Naomi began gently. That was the smart part. You don't attack women like Catherine immediately. You let them build their own elegance first. Let them relax into confidence. Let them believe poise still counts as truth. Naomi established background. Wealth. Property habits. Entity management. Record keeping. Her history of helping Daniel. Catherine answered smoothly. Of course she had assets. Of course she helped her son. Of course wealthy families structure holdings for prudence. Then Naomi moved to specifics. The Westchester house. Catherine claimed ownership. Investment intent. Flexible family accommodation. Naomi showed school mailing records. Staffing schedules. And recurring household communications routed through Daniel. Catherine said Daniel simply assisted. The Naples condo. Catherine said she maintained it largely for her own use and occasional family hospitality. Naomi introduced travel calendars, access logs, and correspondence showing Daniel dictating timing for contractors and guests. Catherine said she trusted Daniel with logistics. Then came the Manhattan apartment. For the first time, Catherine's throat moved before she answered. She called it a temporary city convenience asset. For whom? Naomi asked. For family-related use. Which family member? Catherine's eyes narrowed. I don't recall precisely. Naomi didn't pounce. She simply introduced parking logs, delivery records, and card usage timing. Then she asked, did your daughter-in-law know about this apartment? Catherine hesitated. No. The room shifted almost invisibly. Not because affairs shock courts. They don't. Because concealment linked the whole system together. Hidden housing. Hidden spending. Hidden beneficial use. Hidden control. Naomi waited one beat. Why not? Catherine's answer came too fast. It was not relevant to her. There it was. Not relevant. The judge wrote something down. Then Naomi began the affidavit impeachment. Paragraph by paragraph. Catherine had sworn under oath that various luxury expenditures reflected primarily her own personal use. Naomi showed date sequences impossible to reconcile with Catherine's locations. Palm Beach while Manhattan charges posted. Charity luncheon while Westchester service approvals came from Daniel. Out-of-state travel while her card paid for Sabrina's groceries downtown. Catherine tried to recover with phrasing. My son may have used accounts I made available. Naomi cut in politely. Made available as independent owner. Or held on paper for his benefit? Objection. Overruled. Catherine's jaw tightened. I reject that characterization. Then help us with a better one. Naomi replied. It was beautiful. Not aggressive. Inevitable. Then came the question that changed the room. Naomi stepped closer. Picked up the memo from Leonard Vale's file. Then set it down again without yet reading from it. Mrs. Mercer, she said. If these assets were truly yours in the independent sense you now claim, why did your advisors repeatedly discuss matrimonial exposure tied to your son's practical control? Silence. Not normal, pause silence. Real silence. The kind that moves through a courtroom like a temperature drop. Catherine opened her mouth, closed it, looked toward her attorney. The judge said, you may answer. Catherine tried to regain altitude. In affluent families, advisors often over-document hypothetical concerns. Naomi nodded. Hypothetical concerns. Understood. Then she lifted the email. Need to make sure house remains fully under mom's structure on paper. Emily is starting to ask questions. She looked back at Catherine. What exactly was hypothetical about that? Silence again. I saw it happen in real time. The social armor failed. Not dramatically. Catherine didn't cry or lash out. Women like her almost never do. She simply lost the thread that had held her status together. The assumption that if she spoke in a calm enough voice, reality would bend around her. It didn't. Because some questions are too clean to decorate. Daniel testified after lunch. He looked tired in a way good tailoring cannot fix. Naomi didn't need to establish much. Most of the groundwork had already been laid. Her job now was to close the loop. She walked him through his use of the house. The condo. The apartment. The vehicle expenses. The lifestyle branding. The lending disclosures. And the post-filing transfers. When she reached the tax treatment conflict, his attorney objected repeatedly. Naomi responded with a calm that bordered on merciless. Mr. Enerser, when you wanted financial institutions to view you as substantial. Did you distance yourself from these assets or draw proximity to them? He swallowed. That's a mischaracterization. Then characterize it correctly. He didn't. Instead, he spiraled into word fog. Families. Planning. Access. Advice. Informality. Structure. The language of people who mistake vagueness for sophistication. Then Naomi produced the one-page summary Priya had prepared, comparing Daniel's current litigation position with prior practical representations. She handed it up. The judge studied it. And then she asked Daniel a question herself. Mr. Mercer, is it your testimony that for years you presented these assets as meaningfully available to your life when beneficial, but as entirely beyond you when accountability attached? Daniel went still. His attorney began to speak. The judge stopped him. I asked for his testimony. I will never forget Daniel's face in that moment, because that was the first time I saw him trapped inside his own intelligence. A stupid man might have blurted. A cruel man might have deflected. A reckless man might have argued. But Daniel understood exactly how cornered he was. Every path had witnesses. If he said yes, he admitted the game. If he said no, the records ate him alive. If he evaded, he insulted the bench. So he did the only thing men like him do when the truth finally outmuscles charm. He said nothing useful. And, in court, useless answers are often admissions in formalware. The rest of the testimony felt almost procedural after that. Priya returned briefly to clarify one transfer cluster. Leonard Vale. Under limited examination, carefully confirmed concerns about consistency between formal title positions and practical control narratives. He didn't implode dramatically. Accountants rarely do. He simply refused to save them. That was enough. By the time closing arguments ended, everyone knew the issue was no longer whether Daniel had been clever. It was whether the court would be offended by the cleverness. Naomi's closing was short. The law need not punish wealth, she said, but it should not reward concealment disguised as family planning. Equity requires the court to look at substance over paper. Here, substance has spoken clearly. Daniel's attorney tried one final appeal to technical restraint. Title matters. Formality matters. Caution matters. The judge listened. Then she said, very calmly, so does credibility. That line hit harder than any shouting ever could. Outside the courtroom, reporters were not waiting. This wasn't that kind of case, but professional life has its own press system. Firm whispers. Charity whispers. Club whispers. Board whispers. Donor whispers. And those whispers now had courtroom oxygen. Daniel walked past me without speaking. Catherine didn't look at me. Neither of them had anything left to offer except settlement or delay. And delay only works when people still think your story might survive. Naomi and I stood on the courthouse steps in the late afternoon light. Well? I asked. She looked almost amused. That question, she said, was the one they couldn't survive. What question? She turned to me. Why? If it was truly hers. Was everyone so worried about your claim path? I let that sink in. Then I smiled. Because sometimes revenge isn't a dramatic speech. Sometimes it is one clean question asked in a room where everyone has to hear the answer fail. Part 8. The tax records reached court and took everything with them. The ruling came 11 days later. 11 long, perfectly miserable days for Daniel Mercer. For me, they were strange, not peaceful. Not exactly, but quieter than the months before. Once truth has fully entered a case, waiting feels different. Less like begging. More like watching a storm finish its work. Naomi called at 8. It's an I didn't ask whether it was good. If it had been bad, her voice would have sounded different. I went straight to her office. She handed me the decision in silence and let me read. The court did not declare every disputed asset wholly marital on the spot. Judges rarely make stories that cinematic in one swing. What it did was, in some ways, better. It found that the formal ownership positions advanced by Daniel and Catherine were not credible as complete accounts of economic reality. It found substantial evidence of beneficial control. Marital funding routes, inconsistent financial representations, and efforts to shield assets from equitable distribution through paper structures. It authorized broader inclusion analysis, adverse inferences where production had shifted, and weighted credibility against Daniel and Catherine on disputed financial questions. In plain English, the judge had seen through them, and once that happens, everything else gets more expensive. Settlement leverage changed immediately. So did exposure. Daniel's firm did not fire him that day. That would have been clean. They did something worse. They placed him on leave pending internal review. Leave is public shame in a respectable suit. Catherine, meanwhile, resigned from 2 nonprofit boards for personal reasons. Personal reasons. I had spent 12 years listening to rich people hide rot inside elegant phrases. I finally understood the full genius of the language. They never say collapse. They say transition. They never say liar. They say inconsistency. They never say exposed. They say stepping back. By the end of the week, their attorneys requested renewed settlement talks. This time, the tone was entirely different. No more moral framing. No more closure language. No more attempts to cast me as unstable or emotional. Just numbers. Large ones. Real property allocation. Liquid transfer. Structured equalization. Legal fee contribution. No insulting fiction attached. Naomi reviewed the proposal and said, "Now they're negotiating with the case they actually have." I read every line carefully. The Westchester house would be sold unless one side bought out the other interest allocation. The Naples condo would be included in valuation. Multiple accounts previously treated as remote were now on the table through tracing leverage. Daniel would pay a substantial equalization amount and significant legal fees. And then there was a clause I had been waiting for without fully realizing it. A sworn corrective financial statement. Not a confession. Not an apology. But a formal correction to prior positions. Paper undoing paper. It was almost poetic. Naomi looked at me. "You can push further. Or you can end it from strength." I sat very still. There are moments in a revenge story when you think the satisfying part will be destruction. Sometimes it is. But the deeper satisfaction is different. It is being impossible to erase. It is watching the system that was used against you finally record that you were right. "I want it done," I said. Naomi nodded. "Then let's finish it." The final conference was brief. Daniel looked diminished, though not ruined. Men like him rarely look ruined in the cinematic sense. They still have good shoes, good posture, a decent watch, but the center of them changes. He no longer looked inevitable. Catherine looked older than she had 6 months earlier, not because time had passed. Because control had. Their side agreed. No grand speeches. No dramatic objections. Just signatures. When it was over, Daniel asked if he could speak to me privately. Naomi gave me a look that meant, "Only if you want to." I did. Not because I needed closure. Because I wanted to see what men say when their structures fail. We stood in a side hallway outside the conference suite. Neutral carpet. Framed abstract art. Air conditioning too cold. Daniel kept his hands in his pockets. "For what it's worth," he said. "I never thought it would go this far." I looked at him. "That's because you never thought I'd go this far." He gave a tired half laugh. "Maybe." "No," I said. "Not maybe." He nodded once. Then he said, "My mother thought this was how people protected family wealth." I held his gaze. And I thought marriage meant I was family. That landed harder than anger. I saw it on his face. Not because he suddenly grew a conscience, but because, at last, the sentence was too simple to evade. He looked down. "I did love you." I believed that. Strangely enough, in the limited, self-serving, structurally dishonest way he was capable of love. But love without protection is vanity. Love without honesty is performance. Love without shared security is just dependency with better lighting. "I know," I said. "You just loved control more." He didn't argue. That was the closest thing to truth he ever gave me freely. A month later. The Westchester house sold. I did not attend the closing. I didn't need to. Some chapters deserve ceremony. Others deserve absence. I bought my own place that fall. Not huge. Not flashy. Not the kind of property Catherine Mercer would have admired. It had tall windows, warm wood floors, and a kitchen that belonged entirely to me. An ordinary word. A holy one. I bought my furniture slowly. Chose every piece myself. Paid for it from accounts with my own name on them. No structures. No shell entities. No maternal shields. No polished explanations. Just ownership. One Saturday morning, while unpacking dishes, I found an old photo tucked inside a cookbook. Daniel and me, in our first apartment. He was smiling into the camera with the raw ambition I once mistook for devotion. I was beside him in an old Nike sweatshirt, hair tied up, holding a mug, looking tired and hopeful and all in. I stared at that woman for a long time. Then I put the photo back in the book and closed it. Not because I hated her, because I finally respected her enough not to pity her. She had believed. I had learned. And learning, in the end, was worth more than the version of marriage I lost. As for Catherine, I heard things. You always do. A quiet resignation here. A board invitation not renewed there. Fewer appearances. More time away. Women like her do not disappear. They simply become stories told more softly over lunch. And Daniel? The last I heard. He was still trying to salvage a career from under the shadow of personal financial complications. That phrase made me smile for a full minute when I first heard it. Complications. What a graceful word for collapse. Sometimes people ask if it was worth it. The lawyers. The records. The hearings. The humiliation of discovering how thoroughly a life had been staged around me. Because this was never just about money. It was about being written out of my own marriage by two people who believed paperwork could make that moral. It was about a man who used my labor to climb, then used his mother's name to pull the ladder up behind him. It was about being called emotional when I was, in fact, observant. And most of all, it was about this. He put everything in his mother's name because he thought titles were stronger than truth. But then the tax records reached court, and once they did, the story he had polished for years stopped sounding sophisticated. It sounded exactly like what it was. A fraud with expensive shoes. And that is how I lost a husband, gained a life, and watched the numbers tell the truth he never thought anyone would be patient enough to read.
This content is entirely fictional. Any similarity to real persons or events is coincidental. This video is not news, not a documentary. It is presented for creative storytelling purpose only. AI-assisted production.